Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and sending you, each and every one of you, loads and loads of love. I do hope you're doing great. I'm doing very well, thank you very much. And don't forget to get that fabulous drink, whatever it is that you enjoy drinking, because so many of you have different kind of drinks and it's fascinating. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it was in the summer of 1963 and I was about 15 years old, and I was sitting in the kitchen of our farmhouse, which overlooked spectacular scenic views of the emerald green Kentucky countryside that was heavily flanked by large clusters of trees. It had been raining cats and dogs, and the heavens had opened, and it had poured and poured unceasingly, with the hard but rhythmic patter and tapping sounds of the rain hitting the roof of our 1800s farmhouse. My grandmother was boiling a kettle of water on the stove, and it began to whistle away cheerfully, and the smell of the warm chicken casserole on the hob bubbled away, and the delicious smells permeated and wafted over the entire kitchen. I stared out of the windows, comfortably seated at the large oak kitchen table, where I was supposed to be catching up with some of my homework. But I was busy daydreaming and seemingly mesmerised and transfixed by the rain and almost lost in a meditational trance. I watched the sky darken, almost as if a dimmer switch had turned down the light, and that was when I heard yet more ominous, portentous, loud booms and rumbles of thunder that were so frightfully loud that I almost jumped out of my skin. The sky flashed with the yellow vertical jagged lines of an electric storm, and much like a flash of a camera, the kitchen was briefly lit up by a bright luminescent light, which was followed yet again by another fulminating, ear-piercing boom. "That is quite some storm," said my grandmother. "I pity anyone out there caught up in it." All of a sudden, bursting through the trees, and moving at a very fast, rapid pace, with the grace and stealth of a cheetah, was the dark, shadowy silhouette of a giant tall figure, gliding elegantly towards our farmhouse, and it appeared to be carrying something over its shoulders like a large, heavy sack of potatoes, and that was when our kitchen door spontaneously just flung wide open, and something was gently thrust onto the floor, and whatever it was, it stood up as tall as a man, and then bent down into a crawling position and scurried and crawled under the table on all fours like a frightened animal. I could hear water being treaded under hefty feet, and I briefly glanced out of the window and could see this giant being swinging his overlong arms backwards and forwards as he seemingly floated above the ground, moving as fast as the wind, with an elegance and grace of note. It was covered in what appeared to look like wet dreadlocks of hair, and then it darted into the trees and disappeared from my sight. What was that thing, I wondered? Everything had been blurred, hazy, misty and foggy because of the rain, and I couldn't determine what it was that I had discerned, as everything had happened so fast. In that moment I did begin to wonder if I'd seen it at all, as everything appeared so sketchy and vague. My grandmother looked startled, as her eyes were staring in horror at the wet kitchen floor, now covered in pools of water. She was wearing a bemused, bewildered expression upon her face, as if to say, "What the heck just happened there? And what on earth is hiding under our table?" I bent down from my chair, lowering down my upper torso so that my head peered beneath the table, where I discerned a very bedraggled, wet, hunched-up form that I realised at once was a young teenage boy, possibly around about the very same age as myself, with saucer-wide, terrified eyes. I noticed that every time the sky cracked with thunder and boomed like a heavy drum, the boy seemed to become ever so frantic. I realised instinctively that he was spooked and affrighted by the resounding storm, and rather reminded me of a dog we once owned called Thor, which in fact means thunder, who was ironically completely petrified by storms, much like this boy was, who exhibited exactly the same behaviour as my dog used to. "It's a boy," I whispered to my grandmother. "I think he's scared of the storm." "Just leave him be," said my grandmother. "Wait until the storm recedes, and then we'll try and help him. He's possibly frightened by that deafening, ear-splitting noise, and who can blame him? Even I am shaking, she said. After the electrifying storm receded, my grandmother managed to coax the boy out from under the table with her reassuring, gentle voice. It's all safe now, she said gently. The storm has stopped. You can come out now. Don't send me back, begged the boy, climbing out from under the table and standing up straight at an impressive 6 foot tall. He was trembling anxiously and regarding my grandmother with a pleading look on his face. Mr. Richards will kill me. I know he will, if you send me back. No one is sending you anywhere, said my grandmother reassuringly. You can stay here as long as you like. In the meantime, I'd like you to get off those sopping clothes. You're drenched and soaked to the skin, and I think you could do with a nice hot bath. You look very filthy, boy. Howard, she said, addressing me, please go and get this boy some of your clothes to wear. I think he's about your size. In the meantime, I'll run him a hot bath. After the boy was finally dry and dressed in some of my clothes, I realised that he definitely was about my age and my height, which made him quite tall, actually. He never said a word as he watched my grandmother plate him up a large portion of hot chicken casserole, which he gobbled up very hungrily, and even lifted up the plate to his face and began to lick the plate clean with his tongue, much like a dog, which made me smile because it was kind of funny. My grandmother said, I'm so glad you enjoyed my casserole, boy. What's your name, young man? Don't send me back, pleaded the boy again. Don't send me back, I beg you. The Richards will kill me. I know they will. They're not nice people. No one is sending you anywhere, my grandmother repeated reassuringly. But where are you from, boy? Who are your parents? They must be terribly worried about you by now. I don't have parents, said the boy. I live in a foster home with the Richards, but I ran away 2 weeks ago. Oh dear, said my grandmother, her heart melting like butter and her face softening considerably. Why did you run away, boy? Did they treat you bad at your foster home? Now, we're not going to make you go back, that I can promise you, but we can't help you until you tell us exactly what happened to you. How on earth did you manage to survive for 2 weeks on your own without parental supervision? So this was the boy's story that he told us in his very own words. My name is Michael, and I'm 15 years old. For the first 9 years of my life, I was lucky to spend it at a Catholic orphanage where I was taken care of by the nuns there. They were loving and very motherly towards me, especially Sister Agnes, who I really loved. She took charge of me and loved me as if I was her own child. I remember she was devastated when I left the orphanage, but Mother Superior said that it was just as well. She said I needed to leave because Sister Agnes was becoming too attached to me. I deserved to have a full life and a loving family. The orphanage arranged my adoption through social services, where I was to be adopted by a very loving family who was eager to have a child of their own. It would seem the woman who was to become my adopted mother was struggling to fall pregnant with little success. So I moved in with the couple, and I kid you not, before the paperwork actually arrived for my adoption to be finalised, the couple discovered that my potential mother had miraculously fallen pregnant. All of a sudden, the couple both abandoned me and decided they didn't want to adopt me after all. So began my nefarious journey into the dark, shady world of fostering. In the beginning, I was fostered by a few families, but I never stayed in one location for very long, as my living arrangements were always temporary, and no one adopted me permanently, as I think I wasn't cute enough. People prefer to adopt babies, not little boys like me, just like at an animal shelter, where they invariably always choose the kittens over the cats, or the puppies over the dogs every time. Wherever I lived, I felt like an outsider who didn't belong, but I chose to develop a thick skin about it and not let it get me down emotionally. I knew I wasn't related to these people by blood, so they weren't going to look on me with the same kind of devotion as they clearly showed to their own biological offspring, even if their own kids were in fact the biggest brats, which was often the case. One day I moved in with a family called the Richards, who had 3 natural children of their own, and they decided to take me on as a foster child, as a favour to the church. When I went to the church on Sunday with the Richards, they acted like the salt of the earth, and they would put their arms around me so lovingly, as if I was an inclusive, beloved member of their family. And this false display of affection towards me in front of all the congregation made me sick to my stomach. It was complete hypocrisy as far as I was concerned, because at home my foster family were anything but loving, and they treated me with disdain and contempt, like I was the dog muck at the bottom of their shoes. Those people at church would say, "Mr. and Mrs. Richards, you are the most selfless, generous people taking on a foster child like this. May the Lord God bless you for your goodness." And it would make me want to vomit. Of course I had to go along with their insidious charade to keep the peace, or believe me, if I stepped out of line, I would be in big trouble with the Richards. Everyone looked on Mr. Richard as a pillar of society and a rock of the community, with a reverent awe. He would get on to the pew after the pastor's sermon and start reading the Bible and preaching all about love and forgiveness, as if he was an authority on the subject, but he never practiced what he preached. Never. I promise you, based on illusory, delusive appearances, you would have believed he was a godly man. But he was without doubt a wolf dressed up in sheep's clothing. When that pugnacious man got home, he became a belligerent, truculent bully. And after a few drinks, he morphed into an aggressive, antagonistic, confrontational tyrant that swore unceasingly, using all kinds of unholy obscenities, which was a complete antithesis to what he portrayed himself to be. Mr. Richards would get upset and indignant over the most insignificant things. If we had run out of milk during breakfast time, invariably the blame would be directed at me, and I would be accused of drinking it all, when I don't even like the stuff. My foster mother would blame me for absolutely everything. I remember her pointing at me indignantly and saying, "Before you moved into our house, Michael, we never ever ran out of milk. But now you've moved in, there's never enough milk to be had. And we're always running out of bread for the toaster. You're eating us out of house and home, young man." None of that was true, of course, but that was irrelevant, because the Richards got some kind of warped pleasure from treading on me with unkind words and reprimands. My foster father regularly punched me, and this sort of contentious, reckless behaviour happened all the time. I rarely sensed he enjoyed beating me up, as I discerned a satisfied smirk on his face every time. "That's insane," said my grandmother. "That man needs locking up, treating a child like that. What on earth is this world coming to?" One day when I was fast asleep in my bed, I was pulled out of my duvet by Mr. Richards' beefy, very large arms. He was a big fellow and very strong. He dragged me, kicking and screaming, to the kitchen fridge, where my head was promptly thrust into the refrigerator. I could feel the icy air on my face as he began screaming and shrieking at me. "Where's my ribeye steak, boy?" he demanded. "What have you done with it? I know you've eaten it, you greedy, greedy pig." I could smell the stench of alcohol on his breath, and I said to him, "Sir, you ate your ribeye steak earlier this evening. I saw you cook it myself. I never touched it." At that, Mr. Richards became incensed, because talking back to him was inflammatory, and it made him as mad as a rabid dog. And when I say mad, I mean really, really mad. "Don't lie to me, boy," he shrieked. "I know you ate my ribeye steak. I know you did." And he slammed my head against the refrigerator so violently hard that my head shattered the shelf, causing everything to come tumbling out of the fridge, including a large glass jug of milk, which shattered, broke and split, leaving shards of spiky glass everywhere, and a pool of milk spilt on the floor. Mr. Richards began punching me very hard, and it was exceedingly painful. "Look what you've done, boy," he shrieked. "You are going to have to clean up all this mess you've made. Look what you've done, you stupid, stupid boy." By this time I was so aggrieved by being attacked, and the punches were brutally hard, that I began to fight back. I reached for the heavy glass vase on the kitchen table for self-defence, and thrust it on the side of Mr. Richards' head very, very hard. And the flowers and water scattered everywhere, and some broken flower heads literally floated upon the spilt milk. I punched Mr. Richards again, very hard, and then he fell backwards, slipping and skidding on the milk, where a large piece of glass cut through the scalp of his head, although to be fair it was my hefty blows that had rendered him unconscious. I remember the blood from the open cut was mingling with all the milk, and it looked like Mr. Richards was lying in a sea of strawberry milk. Mrs. Richards, who had been watching the whole scene unfold, began to scream, "You've killed my husband, you nasty, nasty boy! I knew we should never have fostered you. I could tell you were bad news from the very start." At that, she reached for her husband's hunting rifle and began chasing after me with it. I ran out of the house as quickly as I could. "Get here, boy," she shrieked. "I'm going to blow that head of yours right off and leave you in the streets for the dogs to eat up." With all the commotion going on in the house, the other children promptly woke up, and they were clad in their pyjamas and dressing gowns and were begging their mother to calm down, because they assured her that their dad was fine, but just unconscious. "Don't do something stupid, mother," one of the kids cried out. "You know you tend to overreact, and you don't know how to use Dad's hunting rifle anyway. Please stop." "I'll do what I bloody like," Mrs. Richards shouted, "and we'll bury that brat under the porch when I'm done with him." "She said that?" gasped my grandmother, looking appalled. "You better believe she said that," sighed Michael. I sprinted out of that house as fast as I possibly could, while Mrs. Richards fired after me, the bullets missing me sometimes by a fraction of an inch. It was a miracle I didn't get hit, but maybe it was because she was a bad shot. I knew if she could have killed me successfully, she most certainly would have done so, for her determination to kill me was unquestionable. But kudos to all her kids. They were doing their level best to stop her, as they could clearly see she was unhinged and very much overreacting to everything. "You are lucky you weren't killed, boy," said my grandmother, grabbing Michael's hands and squeezing it tightly. "What did you do next?" "Well, I just ran, walked for many miles at a hurried pace, and hitchhiked along the way. And I was picked up by some good people, who luckily didn't ask me too many awkward questions. Eventually I came to a more remote, very rocky wooded area, which was close to where you live. I remember darkness swept over that valley so fast, and I could hear the sound of coyotes in the distance, which made me feel very vulnerable and exposed, as I knew I was a sitting duck for a hungry predator, and that did trouble me quite a bit. I tried to hide in some dense undergrowth, and I carried a large stick in my hands for self-defence, in the event that I should need to defend myself from a rampaging wild animal. "You poor thing," said my grandmother, wiping away a tear that had appeared in the corner of her eye. "You must have felt very afraid all on your own." "Oh, believe me, I was terrified. I was begging for the night to be over before it even begun, but I was glad not to be at the Richards' house any more. All of a sudden something began throwing acorns at me, and that was when I saw the wild woman, and she was just standing there looking at me." "Wild woman?" asked my grandmother, looking perplexed. "What's a wild woman? Are you talking about a homeless woman living in the woods?" "Well, she was like a human in many aspects, I suppose, but there was an ape-like influence to her appearance, and she was obviously female because of her small pert breasts. She was much bigger, wider, muscular and taller than a human being, of course, though with a funny arch-shaped head and very long arms, with powerful strong legs. She was covered with dark brown hair that was longer and more straggly than a bear's, and her face was quite feminine, but her leathery grey skin was rather weathered, and her forehead very wrinkled. She possessed a wide flat nose, deep-set dark coffee-coloured eyes, and a very slender mouth. "I've never heard of such an anomalous creature before," said my grandmother, looking rather surprised. "He's telling the truth, Grandma," I piped. "I witnessed a very strange creature like that carrying Michael to this farmhouse during the storm, but I couldn't see it clearly as it was raining very hard. But his description of the creature fits the hazy impression of what I believe I discerned." "I did not doubt Michael for a moment," said my grandmother, coaxing Michael to go on with his story. "Well, this big hairy critter indicated for me to follow her, and although she was exceedingly intimidating, I knew instinctively that she meant me no harm and was trying to help me, and so I followed her. She pointed to this narrow opening in a rocky outcrop, which I managed to squeeze through, and it opened up into a nice little shelter where I could sleep, and the critter kindly brought me a couple of deer pelts to lie on and an old ice cream container filled with berries and apples. She then placed some thorny briars outside the narrow opening to protect me from coyotes, which she removed every morning and replaced at night. So this kind creature took care of me and brought me food, including meat, which I ate raw because I needed the protein. She was very good to me. I can see she was kind to you, said my grandmother, but why did the creature bring you to our farmhouse? I don't understand that. She's been trying to bring me here for days, said Michael. She kept pointing to your house through the trees and indicating that I should come up here. I think she could see that I was not cut out for roughing it in the woods and should be with other humans like myself. I didn't want to be around any humans, as I've kind of lost faith in people. I've had so many bad experiences with foster homes of late, especially with the Richards. Of course you have, dear, said my grandmother, because you haven't lived anywhere where you've truly been loved and appreciated. But you mustn't tarnish all people with the same brush, as we're not all as loathsome as those Richards are. Anyway, finish your story, because I sense it's not quite over yet. Well, said Michael, I've always been terrified of storms, and for some reason that female creature sensed my obvious distress, as I was cowering in terror every time I heard the thunder break through the sky. The critter pointed to your house, and then decisively tossed me over her back, even though I did protest a little, and then she opened your kitchen door and popped me on the floor just like that, and well, here I am now. Well, she obviously knew you needed help, said my grandmother. You were too obstinate to reach out for it, so she gave you that much-needed quintessential push and took the decision out of your hands. She strikes me as a very intelligent, discerning creature, and good for her, that's what I say, because she brought you to the right house, because I have decided that I'm going to adopt you as my very own son. Really, said Michael, looking astounded, but you don't even know me. What if you change your mind like the other couple did? You might decide you don't like me after all. I've decided that I do like you very much indeed, said my grandmother, and I never change my mind. Ask Howard about that. I'm as stubborn as an ox, with Taurus as my star sign, and I'm set in my ways, and when I make my mind up about anything, I refuse to be budged. It's true, I said. If she wants to adopt you, wild horses will not stop her, and you'll be happy because my grandmother is the best mother you could ever have. So I guess that makes you inadvertently my brother, in a manner of speaking. Tears rolled down Michael's face, and he began to cry. I'm sorry, I don't mean to blub like a baby, but you have no idea how happy you have both just made me. I truly believed I would never ever have a real home or family. And so it was. Before long I was living in my grandmother's house with a brand new brother called Michael, and the two of us became incredibly close. My grandmother showered him with love that had been so absent from his life for so long, and I could see that Michael blossomed in response to that love, like a withered flower being watered and coming back to life. He knew now that he had found a place that he could truly call his home. When my parents returned from their long trip abroad, they were surprised to see that there was another addition to our extended family, and they welcomed him with much love as my brother. My mother promptly announced that she was also pregnant, with baby number 3 on the way, so it was an exciting time for all of us, and the only thing missing from our lives was my grandfather, who had died several years back from a bad bout of pneumonia, and he was sorely missed by the all of us. One day during early spring in the March of 1964, Michael and I ambled along the verdant, undulating countryside, through the flowery meadow towards the woods, and it was an exquisitely beautiful day, as the sun was shining, casting its radiant heat upon our skins. After the cold, biting chill of the long-drawn-out winter that was thankfully now behind us, we were more than a little eager to appreciate the magnificence of this glorious spring day that elevated our mood and lifted our spirits immeasurably. The eastern budwood trees were blossoming with purple blooms, along with the show-stopping display of the saucer magnolias and the pretty pink blooms of the dogwood and crabapple trees, while the white oak trees were covered in hundreds of perfectly new green leaves, and everything was so fresh, crisp and bright. As we set forth into the heart of the woods, we discerned that the ground was covered in pretty bloodroot, along with the loveliest vibrant displays of Virginian bluebells, and sumptuous mosses were swathed over large boulders and tree trunks in a resplendent curtain of emerald green carpets. I could feel a joyful skip in my step as we climbed up a rugged elevation where the hiking trails were bordered by rocky boulders until the ground became less steep and the whole wood green flattened out. We could see a little squirrel celebrating the spring day with us, and was glad that its long days of hibernation were long behind him. He eyed us curiously with his bright brown eyes, positioning his body on a branch, where the warm sun danced through the leaves and dappled his luxurious red coat with a snug warmth. It seemed even the animals were basking in the sunshine this morning. Michael and I came upon a very large oak tree, and we began to engrave our names and dates on the tree trunk. I carved my name, Howard Posner, 19th of March, 1963, and Michael began to put his name in the trunk next to mine. Michael Posner, he wrote, and we both grinned, and then I began to carve the words, Brothers Forever. All of a sudden, everything in the woods became very still, and the bird song receded, and the squirrel we had been watching sunning itself had mysteriously vanished and disappeared from sight. I felt certain that something was watching us, and it sent an ominous chill down my spine. And that was when we saw her. It was a very surly-looking, well-rounded woman, with a face that was so enraged, and her messy hair was dishevelled as if she had been challenged with her comb in the morning. The scariest part of all was that in her weathered, sun-damaged hands she was carrying a hunting rifle and pointing it directly at Michael. I realised immediately that this was Michael's most recent foster mother, Mrs. Richards, and she looked like she was furious. Mrs. Richards, said Michael, trembling with fear. What are you doing here? How did you manage to find me? You thought I wasn't going to find you, sonny boy. Is that right? She smirked. We took you into our home with the goodness of our hearts. And how did you repay us for our kindness? You only went and throttled my husband with a vase to the side of his head. You're not going to get away with what you've done, you nasty little piece of work. You thought I forgot what you've done, sonny boy, didn't you? I never ever forget. I have a memory on me like an elephant. Mrs. Richards, your husband was beating me up, said Michael. He was always beating me up, for no reason at all. And for once in my life I fought back. It was self-defence, that's what it was. Self-defence, is that what they call it now? You could have killed him, boy. That was one hell of a blow you gave to his head, along with using my expensive crystal vase that you broke into hundreds of pieces. I'm sorry, Mrs. Richards, but your husband was hurting me. He was really hurting me. I had to fight back, and I'm sorry that I knocked him out. I really am, but he was asking for it. Do you have any idea what permanent damage you've done to my husband? Said Mrs. Richards. My husband now gets epileptic seizures because of you. You're not going to get away with this. Excuse me, Mrs. Richards, I said, interceding. I know all about you, and from what I've learnt about you, you and your husband are atrocious, deplorable people. It was despicable the way that you treated Michael. And you call yourself Christians. You kind of people disgust me. You should be heartily ashamed of your behaviour, for you're anything but people of God. At that prompt explosion of truth on my part, that frankly needed telling, the piqued, affronted Mrs. Richards became red in the face. How dare you speak to me like that, she said, eyeing me with an acrimonious, disgruntled look on her face. You boys are cut from the same cloth, I can tell. No one will miss you if I blow the heads off both of you right now. Move over there now, to those trees, she said, pointing with her rifle at both of us, and we obediently obliged. She fired a couple of warning bullets into the air that showed us she meant business. I realised in that moment that this psychotic, sectionable woman was seriously deranged. She was unbalanced, mentally unstable, and downright insane. I knew that she was more than capable of blowing our heads off, as she had not come all this way for a nice little chat, and that was very clear. "Don't hurt Howard," protested Michael. "You can blow my head off, Mrs. Richards, if you like, but don't touch my brother. He's done nothing wrong. This is not his fault." "Your brother? Is that what you call him?" mocked Mrs. Richards scathingly. "I see you're playing happy families together. How nice! How absolutely pathetic! You two boys are as bad as each other. I've no intention of leaving any witnesses behind me," she said. "I wasn't born yesterday, and I'm not stupid either. Once we've buried the both of you, the authorities will assume that you've just run away, and you'll be a missing persons case, and that will be that." In that moment I've never felt more afraid, because Mrs. Richards was as tough as old boots and as mad as a March hare. In that moment, wrought with incredible tension, I wondered if I should risk tackling Mrs. Richards by pouncing on her unexpectedly, fighting her and trying to retrieve the rifle from her. It might be worth the risk, especially if we were already dead, so to speak. I was trying to think quickly on my feet about tactics and manoeuvres, and about my next move, when all of a sudden, bolting through the brush like a rhino in full charge, was a large humanoid creature covered in hair. I knew at once that this was the female creature that had rescued Michael from that storm and protected him for 2 long weeks in the forest. She appeared to be helping us again, instinctively sensing that we were in perilous danger and that the batty Mrs. Richards was our greatest threat. The creature lunged towards Mrs. Richards, who began to scream at the top of her lungs, "Help! Help! Please help me! Help me! Someone help!" I will admit that this formidable, daunting creature looked so terrifying and scary, like the monster that your darkest nightmares are composed of, and her imposing height and strength intimidated Mrs. Richards, whose eyes became as wide as saucers, and her body was trembling like a blancmange jelly, and shaking with terror. The female creature grabbed the rifle and tossed it to Michael, who picked it up with a look of relief growing on his face. The creature curled back her lips to expose her glistening large white teeth and began to growl directly at Mrs. Richards, and it was the most horrifying sight to behold, because those growls were equally as fierce and as menacing as that of a lion. "You better run, Mrs. Richards," said Michael. "This is my friend, and she will hurt you if you ever come back here again." Mrs. Richards did try to run, but she couldn't move, as so great and dreadful was her fear, that her body just froze up solid like a block of ice, and she seemed incapable of moving a single muscle. The hairy humanoid was more than willing to help her, for she grabbed the woman in her arms, tossing her up in the air as if she was a bouncy ball, and the woman was screaming in terror, "Put me down! Put me down! Put me down!" The creature slung the woman over her back like a large sack of potatoes and glided towards the road that was situated on the edge of the forest, where I imagine her car was probably parked. We could hear Mrs. Richards' screams becoming fainter and fainter as the creature carried her away, and then shortly afterwards we did hear the sound of a car engine starting up and driving away. Mrs. Richards had gone, and we knew without a shadow of a doubt that we would never see her again. We saw the creature gliding towards us after she had dumped Mrs. Richards off at what I assume must have been her car. She acknowledged us through her congenial warm brown eyes, and Michael, with salty tears pouring down his face, ran up to her unhesitantly and embraced the creature in his arms with an affectionate hug, although his arms could not encircle her because she was so wide. I could see the creature genuinely loved Michael like a son, for she patted his back affectionately and looked on him with eyes that were filled with such unconditional love. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this creature would always have our backs. In the years that passed, we occasionally saw her, and she would make herself known to us and then glide away, and she was beautiful and magnificent in my eyes. I know now, all these years later, that she was definitely a Bigfoot, and Michael and I, who are now both grandparents by now, look back on those times with nostalgic, happy memories, and we have nothing but good things to say about the anomalous creature that we call Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, I really, really loved that story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, goodbye and good night.